My sister-in-law routinely left her children with me, even though I had a heavy workload and tight deadlines due to my job, and because of that, I ended up telling my brother. Now, it appears they're getting a divorce over this. I'm a 23-year-old woman, and my older brother, Mike, who's 28, got married about 4 years ago to Emma, who is 27. They also have 3-year-old twins. While I've always been pretty close to my brother, I never really established a similar connection with my sister-in-law. When Mike first brought her around, I tried to engage her in conversation and learn more about her, but she never seemed that interested in making a genuine effort. After they married and had their children, Emma remained largely distant from our family, which honestly didn't bother me at the time. However, that sense of indifference became problematic when she started expecting me to be at her service whenever she needed help, especially with things related to her kids. In the period right after she gave birth, she would call me and insist that I run her errands, like grocery shopping, because she claimed she was trapped at home with the twins, and Mike was supposedly too exhausted from his job to pitch in. At first, I complied. I told myself that I was doing it for Mike, out of love for my brother. But then, Emma started adding a growing list of tasks for me to complete, which made me realize that if I continued to say yes to everything, I'd never have time for my own life. I eventually turned down some of her demands, hoping she'd realize I was drowning in my own responsibilities. But instead of understanding, she began a new routine that was even more disruptive to me. She dropped off the twins at my place every day to be babysat, while she went about her plans, rarely giving me adequate notice or consideration. I managed to handle the situation for the initial few days, mostly out of shock and the belief that perhaps it was just a temporary emergency. But on the 4th day, I decided to speak up and remind Emma that I needed to focus on my job. My workload was intense, and there was no way I could juggle everything while supervising 2 energetic toddlers. Emma brushed off my concerns, essentially saying that it was practice for when I had children of my own. She pointed out that since I worked from home, I was physically in the house anyway, so I should be happy to help. Her logic absolutely baffled me, because working from home is still legitimate work. Just because I'm not in an office building doesn't mean I'm free to watch 2 little kids for hours on end. Despite my repeated attempts to clarify that I hold a proper 9-to-5 remote job, which is every bit as rigorous as a regular office position, she chose to ignore me. The first time she showed up with her kids, Emma told me it was because her mother had fallen ill and needed her daughter's presence right away. She also insisted that Mike didn't trust babysitters, so she had no one else to turn to. She swore it would only be for a couple of hours at most. I felt guilty saying no, so I said yes, figuring I'd help my brother out in a pinch. But Emma was gone for nearly 6 hours that day. By the time she came back, I was mentally and physically worn out from trying to work and keep 2 toddlers safe and entertained. I explained to her that I simply couldn't handle both responsibilities again, and told her to find another arrangement for next time. Either she needed to call a proper babysitter, or have Mike handle the kids if he could work remotely. Emma, however, launched into a lecture, insisting that as their aunt, I should be happy and willing to take care of them whenever necessary. She painted it as my duty, because we were family. Emma also insisted that her mother's health was in bad shape and that Emma was the only one available to help, because her brother was out of town. Mike, apparently, was under a lot of pressure at his job, because he was aiming for a promotion, so Emma reasoned that disturbing him would be the wrong thing to do. The result of this guilt trip was that I agreed, against my better judgment, to watch the kids for 2 more consecutive days. Each day, Emma disappeared for hours at a time, seemingly oblivious to the stress she was piling on me. By the 3rd day, I was completely drained, but at least I knew that on day 4, her brother was supposed to come home, so I assumed I'd get a break and could finally focus on my own tasks without interruption. My hopes were dashed when, on the 4th day, Emma showed up at my house yet again. This time, she mentioned something about running errands, and that she'd be back quickly. I wanted to protest, but she breezed right past me, dropped her kids on my couch, and then sprinted back to her car. In a split second, she was gone. I was livid. I started texting her immediately, explaining that babysitting for free in addition to my 50-hour-a-week workload was exhausting and extremely unfair. She shot back a text telling me, yet again, that it was my responsibility to help, because we were family and because I should do it for Mike. By that point, my frustration had reached its peak. I had had enough, so I took screenshots of our chat, snapped a few photos of her kids lounging in my living room, and sent them to my brother. I wrote him a long explanation detailing everything, how Emma had turned me into a de facto daycare provider, and how it was negatively affecting my work. I wanted him to see firsthand how thoughtless it was for her to keep forcing this on me. Mike responded about 15 minutes later, apologizing profusely and saying he would drop everything to come pick up his kids right away. That made me feel a bit bad, because I remembered Emma telling me he was stressed about job responsibilities, but I also couldn't keep this under wraps any longer. When I tried to assure Mike that I could manage for just that day, he insisted on coming over right then. When he arrived, I saw the exhaustion etched on his face. He hardly spoke except to thank me and to apologize for the trouble Emma had put me through. Then he gathered his kids and left. I spent the rest of the day in a haze of guilt, convinced that he was disappointed in me for complaining. Little did I know the real reason behind his grim expression was something far more significant. Just 3 days later, I got a call from my parents telling me that Mike had filed for divorce. He had also demanded full custody of the twins, leaving Emma with only visitation. My parents had heard it from Emma's side of the family, who were just as shocked. I couldn't wrap my mind around the news. Mike had always been so in love with Emma, acting as if she was the best thing that ever happened to him, so it felt surreal that he would take such a drastic step. I drove to see him immediately, desperate for answers. He revealed that this pattern of Emma dumping their kids onto unsuspecting relatives was a chronic issue, and my situation was just the latest in a string of episodes. She had previously been leaving the twins with a distant cousin for hours at a time, someone who lived only a few blocks away, and Mike hadn't learned about it until after the cousin moved away. The cousin had jokingly mentioned Emma would have to find a new babysitter, and that was how Mike discovered his wife had been offloading parental responsibilities without his consent. He confronted Emma, explaining that if she was really so overwhelmed or unwilling to watch her own children, she should opt for daycare, or at least a trustworthy nanny. But Emma refused, insisting that she wouldn't place her toddlers in daycare yet and was too cautious to hire a stranger as a nanny. Mike countered that her logic was contradictory. She was too reluctant to trust a professional nanny, but apparently comfortable leaving her kids with a third cousin she'd barely met a handful of times. They argued back and forth until finally, Emma agreed not to leave the kids with random people. If she needed time away, she'd contact Mike so he could shift his schedule and take care of them himself. However, as I learned firsthand, that's not what happened. In just a few weeks, she had resorted to doing the same thing with me, but using the deceitful excuse that her mother was seriously ill. When Mike realized she had lied to him and had been going out with friends while claiming to care for her supposedly sick mother, he was outraged. The day I sent him those messages was the final straw. Emma tried to downplay it by saying that since I was family, it shouldn't be a big deal. But Mike explained in plain words that I also have a full-time position and a life of my own, which she had chosen to disregard. During their confrontation, Mike made it clear that she wasn't behaving like someone who really wanted to be a parent at all, and Emma ended up snapping. She yelled that she had never asked for her life to be consumed by parenting and that, had she known children would strip her of all forms of fun, she wouldn't have had them. This statement was devastating. Mike told me it completely broke his heart and left him with no choice but to file for divorce immediately. She had essentially confessed to not wanting to be a mother in the first place. This revelation left me stunned. I had guessed that Emma had a carefree outlook on life, but I held on to the hope that the responsibilities of marriage and motherhood might inspire a little more maturity and responsibility. Unfortunately, she never changed, and now my brother and nephews were caught in the fallout. Mike was in a terrible emotional state over the divorce, yet he was even more upset at the thought of Emma continuing to have a significant role in the children's lives when she admitted she didn't really want them. She was furious about the whole situation, and her parents were blaming Mike for everything. He filed for sole custody and prepared for a fierce battle, especially with Emma's wealthy parents. I tried my best to console him, but I also felt profoundly sad. I never enjoyed seeing him like that, and I felt guilty that my text messages had been the catalyst for that major fight. My parents then called me again, demanding to know why Mike had taken such an extreme step. I initially held back, telling them they needed to hear it from him directly, because I didn't feel comfortable speaking on his behalf. But they kept pestering me, insinuating that I had some deep knowledge that they were entitled to, so I ended up revealing what happened. Their reaction was unbelievable. They turned on me, accusing me of provoking the entire crisis. They maintained that if I had merely stayed silent and looked after the kids that day, none of this would be happening. I was stunned that they could be so dismissive of Emma's careless behavior, and entirely blame me for the collapse of the marriage. In their eyes, I should have kept Mike out of the loop and become an unpaid babysitter indefinitely, all for the sake of appearances, and not causing drama. It wasn't difficult to grasp what was motivating my parents. Emma's parents are rich and socially well-connected, and my folks love being associated with that kind of crowd. They were thrilled when Mike and Emma got together, viewing it as a golden ticket to fancy parties and high-status circles. Now that the marriage was on the verge of collapsing, my parents feared they'd lose the friendship of Emma's parents and the perks that came with it. The fact that they seemed more concerned about social standing than their son's personal happiness enraged me. I refused to let them bully me into submission, so I hung up. I haven't spoken with them since, though they continue to send me texts blaming me. Part of me wants to block them, but I can't bring myself to do it because I still care about them as my mom and dad, even though they've lost most of my respect. Regardless, I can't run to Mike for comfort, because he has enough on his plate, and I don't want to weigh him down with more problems. At this point, I'm genuinely wondering if I did the right thing by exposing Emma's behavior to my brother. Could I be at fault for being honest about a situation that was already so dire? I'm forced to grapple with these questions now, with seemingly no support from my parents. Yet, given the potential harm Emma's negligence could cause the kids, I still believe I did what had to be done to protect my nephews and set some boundaries. A week has gone by, and there's already an update. Mike has been consumed with legal proceedings. Emma isn't contesting the divorce, but insists on having shared custody of the twins. I can't wrap my head around it, because she clearly stated she wasn't interested in mothering them. Deep down, I suspect her parents are pushing her to at least appear to want joint custody, probably for the sake of preserving their family's reputation. Emma grew up pampered by her wealthy parents, and it shows in her childish outlook. Ever since we were younger, I recall my parents mentioning that Emma came from money, and that our mothers had once attended college together, but weren't exactly inseparable friends. Just acquaintances, until Mike started dating Emma. She acted no differently from a teenage party girl, despite stepping into adulthood, and even motherhood. Her approach to life never matured, which is one of the reasons I never built a strong bond with her. I don't question why my brother was initially attracted to her. Love can be blind. But at least he realized eventually that she prioritized her personal enjoyment over her responsibility to her children. If I hadn't been able to babysit that day, or if her cousin had been someone unpredictable, who knows what might have happened to the twins. Emma's lack of common sense in trusting distant acquaintances, or family members she barely knew was alarming. It's evident she has no real plan for her children's future, and I'm convinced she's only fighting for joint custody to keep up appearances, not because she genuinely wants to be a hands-on mom. My own parents haven't spoken to me either. They've thrown all their sympathy behind Emma's parents, preferring to court their favor rather than stand by their own son and daughter. They keep threatening that I should apologize to Emma and smooth things over, but I'm standing firm in my refusal. I'm not going to sacrifice my dignity, nor am I going to play along with their shallow priorities. Their actions have made it clear what their real motivations are, and I no longer have the desire to please them. 2 weeks later, I finally had a longer chat with Mike. We had stayed in brief contact, mostly about the kids or paperwork, but we were both too swamped to talk at length. The custody situation seems to be going in his favor, but that has prompted Emma's parents to turn their focus on me. One night, Emma's mother actually appeared at my doorstep uninvited and started pleading for my help. She insisted I was the only one who could get Mike to accept a joint custody arrangement. Initially, I felt a twinge of sympathy, until she admitted that what really worried them was the social stigma Emma might face if she lost custody entirely. That was the moment I realized she wasn't there out of genuine concern for the children, but out of fear of what the community might say. Emma's mother stressed how gossip could ruin their image, and it left me speechless. I lied and said I would speak to Mike just to end the conversation and get her to leave. The next morning, I informed my brother about everything she had said. He was unsurprised, but visibly hurt, that his soon-to-be ex-wife and her parents were more concerned about public opinion than the well-being of his children. I suppose this all confirms what we already suspected. Emma's drive to secure joint custody has little to do with love or a changed heart. It's a last-ditch attempt to avoid looking incompetent as a mother in their elite social circles. Meanwhile, the twins have been living full-time with Mike, and I help babysit whenever I'm genuinely free to do so. Otherwise, he relies on close friends who are both trustworthy and willing to step in. He hasn't had the chance to arrange official daycare or hire a professional nanny yet, because his life is still a rollercoaster of legal battles and transition. Once a final custody agreement is in place, he'll probably look into more permanent childcare solutions. Ideally, I'm hoping he secures sole custody soon so that the twins are shielded from the chaotic influence of Emma, who doesn't seem to see them as anything more than an inconvenience. Her time living with her equally superficial parents probably won't prompt a sudden epiphany about motherhood. If she was truly determined to be a decent mom, she would have shown some genuine regret, not just a desire to preserve her public image. As for my parents, they found themselves ostracized by Emma's parents now that Emma appears likely to lose custody. My brother was so fed up with their attitude that he demanded they pick a side. Either show me some respect and apologize, or stop pretending they want to be part of our lives. They haven't apologized. They've chosen to remain silent instead. It doesn't really bother either of us anymore. After all, if they'd really valued us, they wouldn't have tried to throw us under the bus for their social ambitions in the first place. We have accepted their choice, and if in the future they realize they made a monumental error, then that's on them. I'm not going to chase after people who were perfectly fine letting their own children suffer for the sake of a wealthy connection. Right now, our priority is ensuring that Mike and the twins are in a stable environment, away from this toxic mess. 7 months later, everything has finally reached its conclusion. Mike successfully obtained full custody 2 months back, and the divorce became official last week. He's starting fresh, finally free from a relationship that turned out to be far more harmful than he ever expected. It's a relief for me to see him at peace, focusing on raising his children without the constant chaos Emma used to bring. Predictably, once Emma lost custody, her parents promptly severed ties with my parents. Ironically, my parents didn't come running to us right away. Instead, they tried to orchestrate these indirect attempts at contact, making sure mutual relatives informed us how miserable they are. But we both see through these maneuvers. We're standing our ground and refusing to engage unless they're prepared to sincerely apologize for their betrayal. To be honest, life is simpler without their constant drama. I'm relieved my brother and nephews have come out on the other side of this ordeal without Emma's neglect dragging them down. I'm also at peace with my decision to share everything with Mike because, in retrospect, it was the right thing to do. He deserved to know how his kids were being treated. Even though it was painful to watch his marriage crumble, it revealed Emma's true colors. Sometimes it takes a crisis to see what people are really like, and while it's disheartening, the well-being of the twins comes first. Now, Mike is moving ahead in life, focusing on his children's growth and happiness, and I'm proud to be there to support him whenever I can.